All right, so let's get started and welcome everybody. Hello, I'm Stephanie Pedroza, Marketing Manager for Aurigo Software Technologies. And I want to thank everyone today for joining our second webinar in Aurigo's Best Practice series. Aurigo Software has been helping capital owners manage their infrastructure programs for about 2 decades now. And in today's webinar, we will be covering best practices in capital planning. A few quick notes before we get started. This webinar will be recorded and we will provide all registered participants with the recording. The slides will also be provided to all registered participants. We do ask that you please submit any questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A chat box below, and we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't answer all questions during the available time, we will follow up with you via email. Now, I'm super excited to introduce our panel. We have our moderator and marketing director of Aurigo Software, Richard Kramer, who brings over a decade of experience helping capital owners leverage modern cloud-based SaaS solutions. Richard, welcome.
Afternoon, Stephanie.
And really excited to introduce our guest speaker and Chief Technology Officer, Kevin Koenig, who has over 25 years of experience in software engineering, business development, and product management for software product businesses. At Aurigo, Kevin sets the overall technology and product direction and helps evangelize the future of cloud technology solutions for capital infrastructure and facility owners. Kevin, welcome and thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Nice to be here.
Thanks. Well, now I will hand the stage over to Richard Kramer.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome from me to everybody in our audience. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. Today, we're going to be talking all about capital planning and the best practices we've seen from the work that we do with our customers, who are capital owners like DOTs, city and county public works departments, water agencies, airports, and so on, as well as institutional builders in healthcare and education, for example. And to me, capital planning is one of maybe the most important part of any capital program, because it's that real first part of the life cycle. And so it really affects everything else that's downstream from that point, including all of design and all of construction. And when we talk about capital planning, what we're talking about that whole process, really from taking in and organizing the various project requests you might get, for deciding what projects you're going to do and how, and then programming those projects into a comprehensive TIP or CIP program with all your funding sources and that kind of thing. And then the whole approval process as well, gathering feedback, making tweaks to the plan, and then getting it finally approved by the legislature typically. And then, of course, once you're actually in execution mode, there's a whole bunch of activity around tracking the plan and how it's going while it's being executed. So today we're going to be talking about the key 6 best practices that we've learned from our customers that you need to follow when building your plan, and how a system like Masterworks can help you do this. And the first topic we're going to start with, and this is something we hear all the time, is providing a single source of truth for everybody involved with the program. So I'm going to move on, and Kevin, tell us about that first topic on a single source of truth.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So like you said, many of our customers, as we work with them, have told us that they want, as you said, a single source of the truth. And what that really means is that you have a single system that from the very beginning of the project lifecycle and the capital program lifecycle to basically when you ribbon cut every project, that you have a single system that contains either all of or most of the data that's relevant to those projects and programs. If we just move on to the first dashboard, just as an example of what we're going to try and talk to today, when you're looking at a capital program, you really want a single screen that shows you every detail about that capital program from a high level perspective. And to use this dashboard as an example, up on the top left, you have a funnel of all your projects. Moving to the right, you get a cash flow of executing projects, budgeting, and then down at the bottom, a detailed view of every project across every program that's executing, including the original budget, the current budget, how much you've spent, the expenses, and et cetera. And if we just move on to the next dashboard, as you wanted, if you, for instance, wanted to drill down from your entire capital program and just look at it from a funding source perspective, you have that ability to quickly move from the overall program down into the funding source view that, again, gives you a detailed view of every funding source that's available in your organization, what projects are consuming from those, and how those funds have been allocated. And moving on to the next dashboard, you get a view by project type. So these are just some of the examples, and many examples exactly, of what you want out of a system like this, where you can take the data across your entire program and slice it and dice it the way that you want to see it, with the information that's important to you.
Yeah, you know, as I said, Kevin, this kind of thing I hear all the time, and I hear it in different forms. And one of the most memorable for me was a customer telling me, you know, now that we have a single place that we can go for our data, we spend less time arguing over what the data is and what it means, and we spend more time arguing about what to do about it. And that, I think, is it's a real benefit. It just lets you cut through the kind of noise and be able to see exactly what you can do. But what have you seen, Kevin, folks using before they actually deploy a system like Masterworks? What's sort of the status quo that we typically see?
Yes, that's a good question, Richard. So typically we see a mix of generic office software like Excel, emails for approvals, and significantly older homegrown systems that either their IT department has built or they've used a system integrator to build. Now, not only does that slow down decision making, as you said, it also is more costly and can be frustrating for folks to try and do their jobs efficiently. You spend more time wondering if you have the latest source of the truth than you do in actually making decisions based off of the data that you have in hand.
Yeah, very good. Let's move over to our second best practice then. This is all about tying your strategic objectives of your plan to how you actually prioritize the projects.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned it in the beginning, Richard, is that it's super important to make sure that an organization selects the projects that best fit their available capital. You want to make sure that the project mix that you're approving for construction during not only the current capital year, but your 5-year look ahead as you do your capital planning cycle, best meet both what your organization wants and also what your constituents want out of the money that you're spending. And if you just move on, one of the things that you want to do is you want to be able to map your projects to your strategic goals. And what that really means is that organizationally, your organization has strategic goals that they've typically set up, and each project will deliver some of those strategic goals. And this screen is an example of how you would map a project to the strategic goals for your organization. And if we just move on, the next kind of thing that you'd want to do is really score the project, or really set its importance level for not just your organization, but again, multiple different facets. For instance, from a finance, from a safety perspective. And if we just drill down into a single aspect of this, you can set up a set of KPIs for each individual scoring criteria that allows you to really build about what we call balanced scorecarding, which at the end of the day, what you get is a single number that defines the importance of this project. And if we just move on to the next screen, this is a dashboard view of every project in a specific capital program that shows its score or its importance, its budget, and its duration. So you get a really easy overview of everything that's going on in your organization, both from how the projects map to organizational goals, how those projects, how important those projects are to an organizational perspective, and then more importantly, how they map into your programs.
Yep. I think it's also it's useful to not only know sort of how, which projects make it into the plan. The other thing I've heard is that it's important to know which projects don't move forward and why they don't move forward. So are you able to sort of go back and see the history of this stuff from previous capital plans and so on as you build this out, Kevin?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yes, but realistically, every system that you have or every tool that you use for capital planning should provide an audit trail of changes. And that's really so that you can find out who approved this program, how it's changed over time, what the notes were during the approval process. That's a critical aspect so that you can go back and learn from previous programs and learn how literally you started the year and how you got to where you are currently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So another important part of as you're going through and building the plan is, of course, coming up with different scenarios. So let's talk about that and how you can conduct what we call these what if analyses on a project or program.
Yeah. So again, if you look at what we've looked at to date, we've really been looking at aside from the initial overview screens, how the project is set up, the data inside the project, the funding sources, and all of that. But next, what you need to do is you need to build up your program level or your capital improvement program view, of which, if you're a DOT, the TIP and STIP can be extracted from and integrated with federal reimbursement for federal aid, excuse me. In order to build up your programs and make sure you have, like we said, the best program that fits your organization and the budget, what you would typically do is you would build up what we call a master program, which represents the capital improvement program for your organization. That's then further broken down into the individual sub-programs. And then if we move on to the next screen, you can see based off of those sub-programs, you can get a really detailed view of every project that's a part of every program, what their expenditures are, how much money has moved in from previous programming years, how much money will flow out into future programming years, and then the projected yearly cash flow. So this is just a detailed screen that just gives you full visibility. As we move on, this next view allows you to perform what-if analysis just by simply dragging and dropping the schedule bars in the Gantt view. You can move projects out and into your program, change their duration, decide you want to execute a project or not, and really do these kind of scenario-based planning that you need to do to zero in on the best program. And of course, as these things move through approval processes, you're constantly asked to make changes. So it's super important that you have an easy way to come back into these programs, create new versions of them, perform what-if calculations, and rejig the program as either the legislature has asked you to make changes or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scale of the programs that most of our customers deal with, it's not, it's never a single person or even a single department that's involved. There's always multiple stakeholders that you have to bring in. So, the key factor here is, I just think the amount of time you save. So not only is it quicker to draw up the different scenarios because you're using that drag and drop functionality and so on, but you're actually able to get that turnaround cycle with the feedback and the approval through much quicker as well. And I think that's the next topic we're actually gonna talk about is how you manage that sort of approval process.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that, but I did want to, before we get on to this slide, I wanted to just mention that, one of the things that we find is that when you're using Excel, as we mentioned, to manage your capital program, a lot of times these planning processes are performed in a distributed fashion. There are different organizations and sub-organizations that are actually providing the planning. And just consolidating all that information into a single capital planning really becomes a challenge. And that's another aspect of what a capital planning system would allow you to do. And then, of course, as we move into this thing, tracking approvals, revisions, and automating processes, as we mentioned earlier, all of these programs and projects go through complex approval processes. And remembering how a project was moved through its life cycle is super important. But just to look at this display independently, where you see your project list, every project has a status, but also it's color-coded to give you an easy way to look at the current status of every project, whether it's on track from a budget perspective, from a schedule perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Moving forward, just selecting any project, you can click the status button and get a quick view of what the project lifecycle is. In this example, you can see that a project will move through a specific lifecycle as it moves from its early stage from a planning perspective all the way through to its awarded stage to construction and onwards. And then further clicking downwards, you can, by selecting any specific item, you can get a complete audit trail of every action that was taken, who took that action, when they took it, what notes they typed in. So it gives you that single source of the truth of the approval process of either a project or any object in the system went through to get from its initial stages to its approved stage.
Yeah, I mean, in just with what we do, I find that workflow is key because capital owners are all unique. So whether you're going to a mid-sized city or the largest DOT in the country, each owner kind of operates their own way. They have their own specific way of doing it. What that means is for partners on the software side, they really have to have a system that's highly configurable so that you can cater to the exact needs of each customer that you serve. So, what are some of the other workflows that you've seen deployed in Masterworks, Kevin?
Yeah, Richard, so first, I agree. Each organization is different. Yeah, there are standards that the industry uses, but every organization has their unique challenges, their organizational structure, their approval processes are quite different. And that's why you need a configurable business process automation system. But in general, some of the other examples of processes that need to go through approval processes and decision-making trees are budgets, plan approvals, budget change requests, schedule changes. Pretty much every process that you run from a project management lifecycle and construction management lifecycle will go through complex decision-making and business flows. And a system like Masterworks will drive those through a workflow automation system that will completely automate those approvals and just eliminate email as a problem statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, I'm seeing a couple of questions come in from our audience, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Just if you have a question on anything we're talking about, feel free to just type it into your Q&A box, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So we'll move on to our next best practice, which again, very important. It's all about integrating your downstream processes. So sort of, once you're through the capital planning piece. So what are some examples of this that we're talking about, Kevin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, this all comes back to single source of the truth. If you have a capital planning system that's integrated with your project execution system, then you get a single source of the truth that not only represents the capital plan, but also the exact up to the minute project progress. And just as an example, if you take a look at this dashboard screen, this is an example of every document or project artifact that has been added to the system. If you move forward to the next dashboard, you can drill down on that and get a list of every design document. Now, you might ask, why would I need those design documents during the planning process? Well, the reality is the design of the project is iterative and it changes over time, which also affects the budget. And then if you wanted to really get down into the weeds, you could then click and really visualize the 3D representation of the design to give you as a planner or as a project manager an integrated view of exactly what's going to be built if this project moves forward. And I just wanted to point out one item on this screen is, what you're looking at here is actually the reason that we can get down into this 3D representation is because of a strategic partnership that Aurigo and Autodesk have entered into in early last year. Autodesk and Aurigo entered into a strategic partner, and the idea of this partnership was to bring the best project management tool for organizations and integrate it with the best design tools for organizations and really provide the most powerful end-to-end platform for both of our customers.
Yeah, that's great. I assume that's like a Revit file or something like that.
That's correct, Richard. Yeah. That is a 3D rendering of a Revit file. And if we had the live software running, you could actually move around, you can annotate those files, you can actually walk inside of them, right? Just like you were walking inside of it in real life.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I've heard from some capital planners that they're still, when they're going through their preliminary design, when they're, figuring out what to program, some of that is still done on paper. They wait for a big stack of paper from the engineering department with all the details about the preliminary budget estimate and what the preliminary design looks like and so on. So this is really the modern way of doing it, I think. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that we kind of touched on is, a big part of it is obviously tracking your funding. So as you're executing your program, and you're actually starting to design and then actually construct stuff, you want to be able to tie that back to how you funded that program initially. So can you talk a little bit about how we tie those project costs to the funding?
Yeah, I sure can. So in general, project costs are collected on the project and they're tied back to funding sources you set up. So every cost element of a project is specifically tied to a set of funding sources through a set of rules that tell you when you're going to use a specific funding source. So you get the ability to determine what funding you've allocated, how much is left, how much you've spent, and you have that information directly at your fingertips. In other words, it's updated in real time as the project is progressing through construction. And one other thing I just wanted to add is that Masterworks is typically going to be integrated with your accounting system to make sure that the data in your project management and capital planning system is 100% in sync with the data that's in your financial system. They're different, but you want to make sure the numbers are the same and they're represented quite differently.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We certainly do that for a lot of our customers as well. So our final kind of best practice, we're going to talk a little bit just about how monitoring progress and how you're able to do that, how you're able to kind of just keep an eye on the status of things once you're outside of planning, because as I've kind of alluded to, capital planners don't live in a silo where they're only planning. They're really planning for the whole duration of the program, in a sense. So let's talk about monitoring progress, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So first, before I actually speak to the slides, the key aspect is that once you create a capital program and you set the wheels in motion about which projects are going to be awarded and constructed on a specific schedule, that plan changes the second that you put it into place. Projects get delayed, things happen. And what you want to do is you want to be able to monitor progress, which is exactly what we're talking about. Find out where money might have been allocated but can be reallocated, and then change your entire program based off of the real-time monitoring of the actual project. And now we'll talk to this slide. And just as an example, one of the things that you want to understand is budget. What was the original budget of this project? What is the current budget? How much have you spent? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this one dashboard allows you to take a look at that. If you just drill down in more detail and move on to the next way that you might want to monitor it, on each budget line and on the project as a whole, you obviously want to look at how funding is being utilized for this project. And this specific screen is showcasing the funding allocation on a per project basis, not just for this project, but how much has been encumbered, how much has been allocated, how much has been spent, et cetera, giving you a full view of the funding usage per project. Moving on to the next screen, as we looked at two project level dashboards, but here's a program level dashboard, which will show you across all the projects in your program what your trend is from a spending perspective. How much you're planning on spending, how much you're actually spending, which will tell you whether you're overspending or underspending as to original plan. And that gives you levers on whether you want to advance projects or sometimes even delay projects based off of the fact that you had an unforeseen expense. And just as another way to look at it, is this is actually a comparison of different programs across when you're planning it, so that you can do what if analysis of all the different programs. So again, the idea is to give you a whole slew of ways to look at data and take decisions. And then this last one, drilling back down into the project, is really looking at issues and risks on a per project basis, so that you can see what potential problems might be coming up from a project perspective, what issues are actually out there, so you can take some decisions based off of the truly what's happening literally on the ground as a project might be in construction phase.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of great examples. I mean, and I guess, Kevin, this allows you to really, track the overall health of your program, correct?
It sure does. It sure does. And what you see, Richard, is that typically every organization has a set of KPIs that they've created for themselves that really define their version of the truth of what the health of every project is and what every program is. And a couple of examples of those is, cost to complete versus current budget, your current projected cost to complete versus current budget at the project level, and then rolled up at the program level from a dashboarding perspective. Mm-hmm. So, the typically things that most organizations want to know, they want to know three things. Are we on budget? Are we on schedule? And what are the risks to my program? And this dashboard, the last dashboard, is really more about issues and risks, as we said. But there are 100 other KPIs that an organization might define. And the goal of a system like this is not only to provide you a standard set of capabilities that are out of the box, but also allow each organization to add KPIs, add dashboards, and view the data that's in the system the way that they want to see it, for things that are important to them from a program perspective and from a risk perspective and risk mitigation perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, those are the six key best practices that we had. Let's. I know I saw a couple of questions coming in. Folks, you still have time to add another question if you want to do that. But Stephanie, what questions do we have that we can answer for our audience?
Yeah. So the first question is: are you able to run multiple CIP programs on the same account?
So yeah, thanks, Stephanie. The simple answer to that is yes. You can create as many CIP programs as you want and compare them. Finally, of course, there's only one version of the program that's approved and moves forward by either the organization governing body. That could either be a state legislature or a county or a city council. But that would be, the specific approving body would be unique to every organization. But the point is that finally, when you enter in your program, your capital year, you'll have a program that's approved that can then go through, continuous revision, as we've been talking about through this whole webinar.
Awesome, thanks. And the next question that we have is, how long does something like this take to implement?
That's a great question. So of course, every organization's mileage will vary. It typically depends on the size of the program, how many systems you're implementing, integrating with, whether you need to migrate data from an existing legacy system or not. But typically, on average, it takes about 6 months. But in general, it can be anywhere from 4 months to a year. But the average that we see is about 6 months.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question is, what financial systems can you integrate with?
Again, another great question. These are all very, very important questions when you look at deploying a system like this. But what I'll say is, Aurigo has been deploying solutions for the last 17 years. And in that time, we've probably seen every ERP in existence and probably some that don't exist anymore, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. But if you just wanted to name a few of the more important ones that we see all the time and the ones that are prevalent in the industry, we integrate with SAP, PeopleSoft, Aurigo Project Financials, Tyler Munis, SunGuard HTE, just to name a few of the types of systems that we see all the time.
And another question that came in for internal workflow approvals, is there a notification to involve individuals as it moves through the process?
So there are a couple ways that works. First is anytime a process is waiting on an individual, like let's say, for instance, I was the director of an organization and I needed to approve a budget on a project, I would get an email notification that would then provide a link to allow me to log into the system and approve that record immediately. But there are also much more efficient ways. Is inside the software, there's a spot in the software where you can click on that says, what it says is my tasks, which basically is a list of everything that's pending on me and waiting for me to complete. So you always know everything that's waiting on me. Sometimes emails get lost, and that's why it's important to have a spot in the application that you can log into that is a one-stop shop for all pending approvals.
Thanks. And then the second part to that question, this person had two questions. Would there be an option for a decision shot clock for managers to monitor progress?
I'm sorry, can you read that one more time, Stephanie?
So would there be an option for a decision shot clock for managers to monitor progress?
Yes, absolutely. And so in general, what you want to be able to do is take a look at what we call cycle time, is how long are processes taking to run. So because we have the full audit trail of every record that's in the system, by business process, you can say, hey, in order, the average time to process a change order is 23 days. And it sits in this stage for an average of N days. And so what that allows you to do is monitor your progress and have a continuous improvement process instituted that one looks for root causes of why things take a long time and then tracks to them. And just to be really detailed, for things like RFI, where there are typical, or request for information, where there are typically legal requirements on response time, it allows you to prove and audit the fact that you're meeting your legal requirements from a response time.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just add to that, the other, you can also look at that data by project type, by maybe location, by who the project manager is, and sort of start managing by exception. If you can start to build those benchmarks for your organization of how long that stuff should take, so that you can monitor when something's out of the norm and do something about it, before it even becomes a problem.
Absolutely fantastic point.
Right, and it looks like the final question is, I saw federal aid reimbursement on your website. Is that part of capital planning?
It's a good question. So the answer to that is yes and no. And what I mean by that is you don't need to use our federal aid reimbursement management product, or what we call FARM, to leverage capital planning. They're really independent. Our FARM is really geared towards Department of Transportations that are interfacing with FEMAS and getting federal reimbursement. So it allows you to manage the obligation process, the billing reconciliation and reimbursement process. That's what the FARM product is. There are some cities that also get a lot of federal aid, so they use it also, but it's primarily geared to the Department of Transportation. And it's like an add-on to our capital planning project, rather than being required to use capital plan during capital planning.
Thanks. And it looks like that is all the questions that we have for today. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Richard. And if you guys would like to learn more, if you guys have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach us at marketing@aurigo.com or sales@aurigo.com. And that will be it. I hope everyone has a great afternoon.